That jerk tried the same thing with me a while ago, she said. I told him to go to hell. Jim nodded. Your husband is a lucky man, he said bitterly. Obviously a much better judge of character than I am, she retorted. Did she really do this on Valentine's Day? Today's story has a strikingly similar plot. Enjoy watching. Midwestern winters are infamous for their cold north winds, freezing temperatures, and of course, heavy snowfalls. Lots and lots of snow. So, it should have come as no surprise that February was living up to its reputation. For the first 2 weeks, the city had been enveloped in a constant gray sky, with no sun in sight. To top it all off, it was a leap year, making February even longer than usual. People were anxiously waiting for March to bring the warmth, and the extra day in February was certainly no cause for celebration. Jim stood at his office window, gazing out over the winter landscape that was Chicago. By mid-afternoon, the 5 centimeters of snow that had been forecasted for overnight had already turned into 30, with no sign of it slowing down. This kind of weather, known as the lake effect in Illinois and Indiana, meant that the snow had been coming down in torrents all morning, so thick that it was nearly impossible to see the other side of the street. Meteorologists were now predicting another 30 centimeters by morning. At around 1:30 p.m., his secretary walked in. Jim, I just got word that we're closing early. I'm heading out now, if you don't mind, she said. Of course. Thank you, Jim replied, glad for her. Drive safely. I will. I'll call Linda and pick you up, she said, gathering her things. See you Monday, she added as she walked out. Jim walked over to his jacket, which was hanging over the back of his chair, and pulled out his phone from the side pocket. His wife answered after the second ring. Hey, honey, are you still at work? She asked immediately. Yes, but I'm about to leave, Jim replied. I wanted to call and see if you wanted me to pick you and the kids up on the way home, she offered. I know you don't like driving in this mess. You're very sweet, but you're a little late, he said. They let us go over an hour ago. I already got the kids and just got home. Okay, be careful driving. The roads are bad, she said. I'll be there as soon as I can. Love you, bye, Jim responded, a weight lifting off his shoulders now that he knew Linda and the kids were home safe. Still, he couldn't help feeling a pang of guilt. It was February 14th, after all, Valentine's Day. Every year, he and Linda had made a tradition of celebrating in style. He always brought home the obligatory flowers and card, followed by a romantic dinner at a nice restaurant, some dancing, and an intimate night together while her parents watched the kids. Well, this year, dinner and dancing were off the table. By evening, no one would be going anywhere in that snowstorm, but he still thought about the florist. After brushing the snow off his car, he decided he would give it a try. The florist shop was only 4 or 5 blocks away, and 2 weeks before, he'd ordered a beautiful bouquet. He didn't want to show up empty-handed. Thank God you're still open, he said as he walked into the shop, greeted by the man behind the counter. Yes, I'm staying open as long as I can, the florist replied. I figured many men would stop by for their orders on their way home. You're right. That's why I'm here, Jim told him, giving his last name. The florist quickly pulled out a gorgeous bouquet of red, yellow, and white roses from the cooler. Damn, that looks great, Jim commented. What are those purple flowers? Sweet peas, the florist said. I added a few to highlight it. Do you like it? This is absolutely amazing, Jim said. He signed the card and paid with his debit card. It was almost 5 o'clock when Jim finally made it home. He had lost some time on the way to the flower shop, but he was determined. He knew how disappointed Linda would be that they had to stay in on their special night, and he hoped the flowers would lift her spirits. As soon as he stepped inside, he was greeted by the sound of his children. Daddy's home, 6-year-old Emma shouted, followed closely by her 4-year-old brother Tommy. Both children leaped off the couch and ran to him as he walked through the door. Jim knelt down and placed the flowers behind his back so they wouldn't get crushed. Then, he opened his arms to receive the flood of hugs and kisses. Looking up, he saw Linda watching the happy reunion with a warm smile. Finally, she exclaimed. I was starting to worry. Well, you were right, he said. The roads are terrible. I'm afraid we're not going anywhere tonight, darling. Linda looked a little disappointed but nodded. I already called Mom and Dad to tell them we won't be dropping the kids off with them, she said. I didn't have anything defrosted, so the kids talked me into making homemade pizza tonight. I hope that's okay. Sounds great, Jim said, smiling. As Linda turned back to the kitchen, Jim carefully hid the bouquet of flowers. He waited until both Emma and Tommy returned to the couch before quietly sneaking up behind her. Linda must have sensed his approach because she smiled silently, wondering what he was up to. Then he slipped his left arm around her waist, gently kissed her neck, and whispered, "Happy Valentine's Day." Suddenly, a beautiful bouquet of mixed roses appeared in front of her, accompanied by the words, "Happy Valentine's Day, dear." "Oh, Jim, they're beautiful," she said, turning around to wrap her arms around his neck and give her caring husband a strong, passionate kiss. She grinned as she felt his reaction, but then she playfully pulled away. "That will have to wait," she said, patting his trousers with the back of her hand. She took the flowers and placed them on the table, then took the card from the envelope. "Oh, darling, what did I do to deserve you?" she said with a sigh of contentment before giving him another quick kiss. It wasn't the romantic evening they had planned, but seeing the joy in their children's faces when they realized they were going to have a 4-day weekend with both mom and dad made it easier to accept. Emma and Tommy were already planning their adventures for the following day. Snowmen, snow forts, and a long snowball fight, all of which would begin early in the morning. By the time the clock struck 9, Linda and Jim had tucked their excited children under the covers for the night. There was still plenty of time left before bedtime, and Jim was determined to make the most of it. "Darling, I'm so sorry that our plans didn't work out," he began. "I know the weather has been frustrating, and I know how much you were looking forward to tonight." Linda grinned. "Oh, so you're the one who ordered all this snow?" "Huh. There will be other evenings when we can go out for dinner," Jim replied. "We'll have our own Valentine's Day once the weather clears up. But honestly, 4 days off with you and the kids is a great consolation prize. Believe me. Besides," she added, smiling warmly, "I still have a beautiful new evening dress and this gorgeous bouquet of roses. What more could I ask for?" Jim's smile deepened as he responded in his most seductive voice. "Why don't you go put on that new evening dress while I open the wine? I'll put on some soft, romantic music, and we'll have our own private Valentine's Day right here." Linda purred with enthusiasm. "Sounds wonderful, except you won't see the evening dress until you take me out somewhere for the evening." "That's a plan I can get behind," Jim replied, a playful glint in his eye. "You go ahead and put it on, and I'll take it off for you later." She giggled, her eyes twinkling. "That's not quite what I said, but I really like your plan. I'll be down in a few minutes." She stood, kissed him on the lips, and then ran upstairs. Jim, feeling excited by the evening ahead, thought to himself that he could start a new tradition with his wife. He opened a bottle of semi-dry Pinot Grigio to let it breathe, placed it in an ice bucket, and set it on the coffee table with 2 wine glasses. "Okay," he thought, "what's next?" Nothing says romance like a warm, crackling fire in the fireplace. A few minutes later, the fire was roaring. Still, Jim felt like something was missing. He scanned his collection of vinyl records for the answer. He dimmed the lights, letting the flickering glow of the fire set the mood. Then, carefully, he lowered the needle, filling the air with the voices of love. When Linda entered, Jim was struck by her beauty. She, in turn, was touched by the romance her husband had created. They sat together in silence for a while, huddled close in front of the fire, reflecting on the 10 years they'd spent together. When the time came, Jim took Linda's hand and asked her to dance. As they swayed to the music, Linda closed her eyes and rested her head against his chest. "Darling, this is incredible," she whispered. "Thank you," he replied softly. "You're welcome, my dear. Happy Valentine's Day, baby." "Same to you, darling," she said, her voice full of affection. "I was going to buy you a card on the way home today, but with all the chaos, I didn't have the chance. I'm really sorry." "Don't worry about it, honey," she smiled. "I don't need a card to know that I'm your Valentine." They danced a little longer, shared a bit more wine, and then quietly made their way upstairs, careful not to wake the kids. By the time Jim closed the bedroom door behind him and turned around, Linda had nearly taken off her dress. "Well," she asked, standing before him in her holiday attire. It was then that Jim realized he was still fully dressed. He quickly took care of the issue, and by the time Linda slid under the sheets, he was ready. Though there were times when Linda enjoyed a more rough and passionate approach, this wasn't one of them. They spent a wonderful night together. The next morning, their long weekend began with a knock at the bedroom door. "Mom, Dad, come on, wake up," Emma called, followed by her brother. "Tommy and I are hungry." Linda looked at the clock. It was a little after 7. "Okay, honey, you and Tommy go downstairs and watch some cartoons for a bit. Dad and I will be down soon." "Okay, Mom, but hurry up," Emma said, her excitement palpable. "Tommy and I want to build a snow fort." "We'll be down in just a minute, dear," Linda said, already hearing the sound of little feet running down the hall. Jim barely stirred. He purred as he felt his wife's lips gently press against his. He hugged her and, without hesitation, turned her onto her back. Linda immediately understood what he was thinking, but she had to deliver the bad news. "Sorry, darling, this will have to wait." The kids were downstairs, eagerly waiting for breakfast. Their hunger was clear, and Jim, pretending to be upset, lowered his head dramatically. "Well, we can't go down there without a shower," he said. Linda grinned, understanding exactly what he meant. "Yes, they'll definitely know that smell," she teased. Jim sighed in agreement. "Yeah, you're right. We really need to take a quick shower." "I'll wash your back if you wash mine," she suggested, smiling mischievously. "This way we can finish in half the time." After their quick, efficient shower, the couple made their way downstairs. The children were still sitting on the couch, eyes glued to the TV, not noticing the brief delay. "What do you guys want for breakfast?" Linda asked cheerfully. "Pancakes," both kids shouted in unison. With that, they sat down to a hearty breakfast, followed by a full day of outdoor fun. Jim and Linda spent the afternoon building the best snowman ever, according to Tommy and Emma. And of course, no snowman was complete without a snow fort for protection. It turned into an all-day affair, and by the time Jim and Linda were ready to rest for the night, they were completely exhausted. As they curled up together in bed, Linda heard Jim chuckling softly. "What's so funny?" she asked. "I just realized today's only Friday," Jim said with a grin. "We still have Saturday and Sunday ahead of us. I'm not sure I can handle all this." Linda laughed, placing her hand on his chest. 5 minutes later, she added, "We were both fast asleep." Saturday morning arrived with a break in the action. The kids were distracted by Saturday morning cartoons, and that gave the parents a temporary respite from the snow fort building. However, by the afternoon, the excitement of defending their award-winning snow fort from invading forces took over, and the snowball fight began. It lasted for an hour, filled with laughter and lightheartedness, and ended only when Jim raised the white flag of surrender. By Sunday, the streets had been mostly cleared, so they decided to take the kids to the park for sledding. It was a weekend full of lasting memories. As they tucked Emma into bed that night, she reached over and wrapped her arms around both of her parents. "Thanks for playing with us this weekend," she said with a big smile. "I'll never forget this." "I love you, Mom and Dad." "We love you too," they both responded warmly. "Now go to bed. You have school tomorrow." By the time they went to bed themselves, Jim and Linda were both ready to return to work after the whirlwind weekend. They were exhausted, and the freezing temperatures outside only seemed to drag the days on, with piles of snow everywhere as a constant reminder of the disrupted holiday. Like most families, Jim, Linda, and the kids found themselves spending more time indoors. The long, bitter winter had started to take its toll on everyone's mood. Even the usually carefree relationship between Emma and Tommy seemed to show signs of strain. As February was nearing its end, Jim and Linda settled on the couch with a glass of wine after putting the kids to bed. It was a quiet night until Linda's phone rang. Jim groaned softly. "Who could be calling at this time?" he muttered. Linda reached for the phone and checked the screen. "It's Dee," she said with a slight laugh. "I better take this. It might be important." Dee and her husband Dave were part of Jim and Linda's close-knit circle of friends. Along with 3 other couples, they had formed a tight bond over the years. Though they were all similar in age, financial situation, and interests, it was Dee and Dave they were closest to. The group met several times a year, often for shared activities, and their gatherings were always filled with fun. Linda took the phone into the kitchen, her voice fading as she began talking, but Jim could still hear bits of the conversation. "Oh, Dee, that sounds like a great idea." "Where?" "Oh, that's perfect." "Yes, I think so." "Oh, I'm sure he'll love it." Yes, it sounds like fun. Linda reappeared in the living room, her steps light, her face beaming with excitement. She practically glided over to Jim and plopped down in his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. Jim, hearing the tone of the conversation, could already tell that whatever she had planned was something he would probably enjoy, but he had to play it cool. "So, what have you gotten us into?" he asked with a smile. "You'll love this," she replied with a mischievous glint in her eye. Dee came up with a great idea. It's leap year this week, and they're planning a night of dinner, dancing, and… Jim teased, "But won't Dave be mad if I'm going with Dee?" Linda playfully punched him in the shoulder. "The party's with me, dummy. Remember that?" Jim raised an eyebrow. "All right, I'm listening." "Well," Linda continued, "Dee heard about this amazing dance club downtown from a couple of Dave's colleagues. It's called Downbeat. They have live music on Friday and Saturday nights. Normally, they charge $10 per person, but here's the catch. They have a deal with a hotel. If you stay there, you show your room key, and the club lets you in for free." Linda's smile grew wider as she went on. "Dee thinks we can all get a room at the Madison and have dinner at the restaurant before heading to the club. After a few hours of dancing, we can head back to the hotel for a night of fun. And since the club's just a block away, we won't even have to worry about driving." Jim was intrigued, but he didn't want to show it too quickly. "Well, that sounds like a great idea," he said, trying to hide his excitement. Linda leaned in for a kiss, and they both shared in the anticipation of what promised to be a much-needed escape from the harsh winter and the challenges of the past few weeks. "What about the children?" Jim asked, realizing they'd need a plan for their care that night. "We'll need to see if your parents can host them for the evening." Linda smiled, already having thought ahead. "Already taken care of," she replied. Phil and Jane asked Mrs. Porter to look after their kids for the night, and she said she's happy to take Emma and Tommy along with hers. Jim paused, appearing to think it over. "What's there to think about?" Linda wondered aloud. Jim finally answered, "Well, okay, but only on one condition." "Which is?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "You'll wear the dress you bought for Valentine's Day," he said with a mischievous grin. "The one you haven't seen yet?" she teased. "Exactly," Jim replied. Linda laughed, agreeing. "It's a deal." She sealed it with a kiss. The following day, Dee called again with good news. "Everything's all set," she said. "I confirmed with all 5 couples, and I booked a table for 10 at the Madison Hotel dining room for 7:30 p.m. Dee's efforts weren't over yet, though. It was a bit trickier to reserve a table for so many at Downbeat. She continued, "But I worked it out. They'll have to move a couple of tables together, but everything should be ready by 9 p.m. She hesitated before adding, "The only thing I didn't do was book the rooms. I figured it's up to everyone to decide on their preferences, but I wouldn't wait too long, Linda. When I made the reservation, it occurred to me that we might not be the only ones trying to get a key card to avoid paying the $20 entrance fee." Linda grinned. "I'll have Jim order the room as soon as he gets home. We're really looking forward to it, Dee. You're a genius for coming up with all of this." After a quick exchange of pleasantries, Linda hung up. A short while later, Jim booked a room at the Madison Hotel, securing a double bed for February 29th. All that was left now was to wait. With something to look forward to, the days passed more quickly, and with each one, the weather seemed to warm up just a bit. By the time Friday arrived, Jim and Linda were both brimming with anticipation, like a couple of teenagers on their first date. Linda, having already showered, was busy packing an overnight bag for the children. "They're so excited," she told Jim. "Emma calls it a slumber party because Phil and Jane's kids will be there too. I called Mrs. Porter to thank her and told her we'd send over a couple of pizzas. You don't mind, do you?" she asked. "No, of course not," Jim replied with a smile. "It's a great idea." He kissed her, but noticed she seemed a little disappointed. "Is something wrong?" Linda asked, sensing his mood shift. Jim grinned mischievously. "I just thought we'd start the evening off right. Take a shower together, you know?" Linda shook her head. "Honey, we need to check into the hotel by 7. You still have to get ready, and we have to drop off the kids on the way. If we take one of those marathon showers together, we'll never get there on time." She softened her tone. "Besides, we have the whole night ahead of us," she teased, faking a long sigh of disappointment. Okay, Jim said with a wink. "Go take your shower. I'll get the kids settled." Linda made a snack for the children, then finished getting ready. Emma and Tommy, completely engrossed in their excitement, didn't even notice Jim had come home until they saw him at the top of the stairs. "Daddy!" They both shouted in unison, running to hug him. Jim returned their hugs and kisses, then heard Linda call them down for their snack. "Go on," he told them. "Mom made you something to eat. I need to get ready, but I'll be down in a minute." In the kitchen, Linda had prepared a sandwich and a glass of milk for each of them. "Mom and Dad need to get dressed," she told them, "so you can watch TV until we're ready to leave." Meanwhile, Linda was sitting at the dressing table in her underwear when Jim emerged from the shower. He couldn't help but comment, "Are you already excited? Taking something for it?" He joked. "No," she replied with a sly smile. "I just have a husband who's about to see me in my underwear, so what do you expect?" Linda took her time with her hair and makeup, knowing that Jim was getting more eager by the second. He looked sharp in his suit and tie, but he hadn't seen the dress yet. She, however, was in no rush to reveal it. "Go downstairs and wait with the kids," she said playfully. "I'll be down in a few minutes." When Jim joined the children on the couch, they were all watching TV. Then, the moment Linda appeared at the top of the stairs, time seemed to stand still. Emma gasped, "Oh, Mommy, you look amazing." Linda looked expectantly at Jim, who was speechless for several moments. The dress was breathtaking. Its blue hue perfectly highlighted her eyes, making them shine with an almost hypnotic intensity. The fabric of the dress clung to every curve, accentuating her body in all the right ways, while the flare at the bottom swirled around her legs with every graceful movement. Jim finally found his voice. I'm speechless," he said, still staring at her in awe. "You look, I don't even have words. You're beyond stunning, beyond gorgeous. I don't think a word has been invented yet to describe how breathtaking you look," Jim said, his voice filled with awe. Okay, Linda laughed. "You don't need to go overboard." Jim shook his head, unable to contain his admiration. "Honey, I can't help it. You look absolutely amazing." Her cheeks flushed with pleasure at his words. Just then, Tommy walked in. "Mom, you look really beautiful," he said earnestly. "Well, thank you," Linda replied with a modest smile. The couple dropped off the children and arrived at the Madison Hotel lobby just after 7. They spotted Phil and Jane at the reception desk, and Jim and Linda made their way over to join them. "Hey guys, ready for a fun night?" Linda greeted her friends. The two turned around at her voice, and Phil immediately shot Linda a quick glance. "God, Linda, you look incredible," he said in surprise. Jane playfully elbowed him in the ribs. "Now you can put your eyes back where they belong," she teased. "But seriously, you look great, Linda." "You too, Jim," she added with a wink. Linda smiled gracefully as she accepted the compliments. "Thank you, kind lady," she replied to Jane. "Jim, ever the gentleman," echoed Linda's sentiment. "You both look fantastic as well." Phil and Jane waited as Jim and Linda checked in before the four of them headed to the elevator together. "We'll see you downstairs at the restaurant in a few minutes," Linda called out as another couple exited on a lower floor. Once inside their room, Jim was eager to start the evening, but Linda placed a hand over his mouth before he could kiss her. "If you smear my makeup, I'll kill you before dinner," she said with a playful smile. Jim glanced at his watch. "But we've got 15 minutes, dear. Time for a quickie," he joked. Linda raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a grin. "No quick ones for you, my love. I want you all night long," she said firmly. Later, as they joined the group for dinner, Linda received more compliments from the entire table. Dee kissed her on both cheeks, as was customary. The conversations flowed freely, full of jokes and laughter. From appetizers to dessert, everyone was in high spirits, enjoying the evening together. After dinner, they made their way into the club, handing in their coats as they were led to their table. Linda and Jim held hands the entire way, enjoying each other's company. A waitress in a skimpy outfit approached their table to take drink orders, and the group eagerly awaited their drinks before hitting the dance floor. When the drinks arrived, Linda took a sip of her strawberry daiquiri, then squeezed Jim's hand. "Come on, honey, let's show them how it's done." The rest of the group followed their lead, and soon everyone was caught up in the fun. The band, while not spectacular, had a solid repertoire and kept the energy high by mixing up their songs. Linda and Jim were among the last to return to the table, both a little out of breath, but still energized by the music. Though Linda was the better dancer, Jim held his own, and Linda never felt shy to have him as her partner. Occasionally, she would accept an invitation from someone lighter on their feet, but Jim was surprised when she turned down an offer from Dave, the best dancer in their group. "Thanks, Dave, but my dance card with Jim is completely full tonight," she said with a wink. As the night wore on and everyone caught their breath, murmurs of excitement started to ripple through the crowd. Dee instinctively turned toward the entrance. "Oh my God," she exclaimed loud enough for their whole table to hear. "That's Mark Lavalier." Everyone in town knew who Mark Lavalier was, even those who didn't follow football, including Linda, a star on the city's NFL team. Lavalier was a well-known figure not only for his prowess on the field, but for his generosity and good deeds off it. Tall, handsome, well-built, and wealthy, he was the kind of man that every guy envied and every woman admired. Judging by the way women fawned over him, he was definitely a ladies' man. Dee continued, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "He's even more impressive in person." Lavalier entered the club with two teammates, immediately attracting attention as he was escorted to a table not far from theirs. He quickly became the topic of conversation, with the men discussing his legendary achievements on the field, while the women admired his good looks, charm, and kind-hearted nature. After a few minutes, Dee nudged Linda and whispered excitedly, "Look, he's standing up." Linda turned her attention to Lavalier, who was now making his way across the room. "I think he's going to ask someone to dance," Dee observed. All eyes followed him as he approached a woman in her 30s who was sitting with a man. Jim felt an uneasy twinge in his stomach. The woman wasn't alone, and whether her companion was her husband or just a date didn't matter to him. It was always poor etiquette to ask someone to dance without first seeking permission from their partner. Although Jim couldn't hear what Lavalier said, it seemed as if he was ignoring the man entirely. Linda noticed Jim's reaction and commented, "God, for such a big guy, he moves well." "You're absolutely right," Dee agreed, nodding in appreciation. The men resumed their conversation while the women continued to watch Lavalier and his dance partner. The pair danced through the first song, but by the end of the second song, the woman returned to her seat. Lavalier followed shortly after, glancing briefly in their direction before settling back at his table. For a brief moment, Jim was relieved as the conversation at their table shifted away from Mr. Football and back to their usual lighthearted topics. Just as he was about to ask Linda if she was ready for another round of dancing, he noticed his friends across the table glancing up. Before he could turn to see what had caught their attention, a voice spoke from behind him. "I'm Mark Lavalier. May I invite you to this dance?" Lavalier extended his hand toward Linda. Dee, noticing Jim's growing anger, could tell he was on the verge of saying something he would regret. "Jim," she whispered just loud enough for him and a few others to hear, "please don't. It's just a dance. Don't ruin it for her." Jim, though visibly furious, kept his mouth shut, opting to accept Dee's plea. However, his frustration was evident to everyone at the table. "Well, that's all her," Dave quipped, grinning at Jim. "I save all my dancing for my husband." "Ouch," he added, as Dee kicked him under the table. Paul chimed in next, his voice teasing. "Don't tell me you're jealous, Jim." Jim's reply made it clear that he didn't find the situation amusing. "I'm not jealous. I'm angry. I don't mind them dancing. But it's the complete disrespect I just received from him and honestly from my wife too." His tone became sharper. "This arrogant jerk completely ignored me as if I wasn't even there. It's insulting, but I think I'm even angrier at Linda. She knows how I feel about this and has always asked permission before dancing with someone we don't know. It's about respect. It's about showing that a wife values and loves her husband. I've never said no to her, but this time she ignored me, just like he did." Jim's frustration was palpable. Dee, sensing that Jim wasn't in the mood for more teasing, spoke up. "Jim, this is Mark Lavalier," Jane interjected, trying to provide some context. "You're being a little hard on him." "I don't care who it is," Jim snapped. "You don't approach a woman, ignore her partner, and then ask her to dance. It's incredibly rude. He did the same thing earlier with that other woman. It's just disrespectful." The table fell silent. For a moment, no one knew how to respond. Finally, One of their friends quickly changed the subject, bringing up a new car he was thinking of buying. Jim tried to push the incident aside, unwilling to let it ruin the night he had planned with Linda. He made an effort to join the conversation, but his gaze remained fixed on his wife. The band began playing a slow song, and Jim assumed that once it ended, Linda would return to him. However, he hadn't anticipated that Lavalier had spoken to the band and requested several slow songs in a row. Jim's anger simmered as he watched Linda melt into Lavalier's arms during the second dance. This is blatant disrespect toward your husband, he thought. With the slow dances continuing for a third song, Jim couldn't take it any longer. I'm going to end this right now, he muttered angrily, standing up and grabbing his arm. Jim, please, Dee pleaded. Think about how grateful she'll be to you later tonight if you let her enjoy this moment. Yeah, come on, man, Dave and Paul added in unison. They're not hurting anyone. They are, Jim snapped. We can all see it. He shot a glare at his wife before releasing a frustrated sigh. Against his better judgment, Jim sat back down. He tried to engage in the conversation again, but it was hard to focus. His relief came when the band announced a 15-minute break. As Linda returned to the table after dancing 3 slow songs with Lavalier, Jim was surprised to see that her expression wasn't one of joy or triumph. Instead, it was filled with worry and guilt. Linda knew she had crossed the line, and Jim could tell that she felt it too. Deciding not to cause a scene, Jim made the choice to let the rest of the evening unfold without further conflict. Before sitting down, Linda announced, "I need to freshen up," and asked Dee to join her in the ladies' room. Once the restroom door closed behind them, Dee could no longer contain her curiosity. "Well," she asked excitedly, "how did it go? Were you able to feel his excitement while you were dancing?" "Oh yes," Linda admitted, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Did he seem big?" Dee teased. "I don't think he's any bigger than anyone else," Linda responded evasively. "I don't really know. I can't say." Dee paused, mulling this over. Linda seized the moment to make a confession. "He wants me to spend the night with him." Dee, still distracted by her earlier thoughts, was slow to grasp the weight of Linda's words. "What? Who? Mark? Who else do you think?" Linda said, her voice quiet but resolute. "You mean he wants you to go home with him? Spend the night with him?" Dee asked, her voice thick with disbelief. "Exactly," Linda confirmed, her eyes searching Dee's face for any sign of judgment. Dee stared at her friend in shock, unable to fully process what she had just heard. "I don't know what to do," Linda confessed. "I've never cheated on Jim before, but this is Mark Lavalier. I'll never get an opportunity like this again." "Did Jim say anything while we were dancing?" Linda asked. "Oh, yes, he's angry," Dee replied. "First, he's upset that Mark ignored him when asking you to dance. And he's even more upset that you didn't ask for his permission first." "Yeah, I thought about that when we walked to the dance floor," Linda admitted. "But by then, it was too late." Dee reflected on her friend's predicament and was ready to offer advice. "Honey, Jim's already angry. Any romantic plans you two had for tonight are probably off the table. I say go for it." "Do you really think so?" Linda asked, her voice uncertain. "Absolutely," Dee replied. "Like you said, how often do you get an opportunity like this in a lifetime?" "But what about Jim?" Linda hesitated. "How do I explain this?" "I'll handle that," Dee assured her. "Don't worry, I'll make him understand." Dee watched as Linda seemed to weigh the situation. Finally, Linda made up her mind. "I'm going to do it," she said with a mix of resolve and anxiety. "God help me. I just can't say no. But how are you going to leave without Jim noticing?" Dee asked. "If he sees you, he'll confront you, and he might even get into it with Mark." "Mark said he knows a back exit," Linda explained. "He gave me his number and told me to text him from the ladies' room if I decide to go. He'll meet me in the hallway, and Jim will never know. Then go ahead and text him," Dee urged, "before Jim starts wondering where we are and comes looking for us." Meanwhile, Jim was so focused on watching Linda and Mark dance that he didn't realize how badly he needed to use the restroom. He thought about waiting for Dee and Linda to return, but didn't know how long they'd be. After a moment's hesitation, he stood up, excused himself, and headed to the men's room, which was located by the bar, far from the dance floor. When Jim came back, he noticed Dee sitting next to Dave, but Linda's chair was empty. The group hadn't returned to the dance floor, so he knew she wasn't dancing. "Where's Linda?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "Don't worry, Jim," Dee replied quickly. "She's fine. She just needed some time." Jim furrowed his brow, sensing something was off. The other people at the table were giving him strange, uncomfortable looks. The only explanation he could come up with was that Linda might be planning a surprise for him, trying to make up for her earlier behavior. He sat back down, but couldn't shake his growing unease. The mood at the table had shifted. Everyone had become quieter and more distant. Minutes passed, and his anxiety intensified. "What's going on, Dee? Where's Linda?" he asked again. "Jim, I told you. She's fine," Dee repeated, her voice edging with impatience. "I'm not asking if she's fine. I'm asking where she is," he snapped, his suspicion growing. "Did she go back to the hotel?" Jim pressed. Dee's composure was starting to slip. She was visibly nervous, and Jim could tell that she was about to give something away. "Please, Jim," she said, trying to buy some time. "Just relax." But Jim wasn't relaxing. He pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Dee asked, her voice anxious. "I'm calling her," Jim answered, dialing the number. "I want to know what's going on." When Linda's phone went straight to voicemail, his suspicion deepened. Next, he called the hotel, using the number he had from the reservation. "Yes, room 4881, please," Jim requested. He let the phone ring for 15 long seconds before giving up in frustration. Turning to Dee, his patience snapped. "I'm going to find her," he declared, standing up abruptly. "Jim, where are you going?" Dee called after him. "If you don't tell me where she is, I'll turn this place upside down until I find her," he shouted back at her. Dee scrambled to catch up with him, grabbing his arm just as he reached the bar. "Jim, she's not here," she admitted. "She's not at the club." "Then where the hell is she, Dee?" he demanded. His voice had turned sharp and menacing. "I'm serious," he added. "Tell me what's going on, or I'll call the police." Dee hesitated. Then, in a rush, the truth slipped out. She went to spend the night with Mark. Jim stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words. "I don't understand. Are you telling me she left me for him?" "No," Dee interrupted quickly. "She didn't leave you for him. She'll be back tomorrow morning." "Jim, she loves you more than anything," Dee continued, trying to calm him down. "You and the kids are her entire world. She couldn't survive without you. But sometimes we all need to do something just for ourselves." His expression remained hard, unaffected by her attempts to soften the blow. "Where is she, Dee?" he asked again, his voice low and cold. Dee hesitated once more, then sighed. It wasn't even her idea. Mark invited her. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. It will never happen again. "Please, Jim, let her have this night, and she'll be grateful to you forever." "It's the same thing you said about dancing," Dee pleaded. Jim growled in disbelief and anger, his voice thick with emotion. He shook his head, still reeling from the revelation. "I have to see this for myself," he declared, and Dee followed him back to the table, clearly frightened. Jim's gaze first fell on his wife's vacant chair, then quickly shifted to Lavalier's table, where only 2 of the 3 chairs were occupied. That was the confirmation he needed. His heart pounded as he scanned the faces of everyone seated at his table, but not one of them would meet his eyes. The realization hit him like a blow to the gut. They all knew. Every single one of them knew that Linda was going to slip away and spend the night with Mark Lavalier, and none of them had said a word to him. His anger surged. He stood up, his voice booming across the room. "You all knew. Every damn one of you knew that my wife was going to sneak out and spend the night with that wife-stealing son of Mark Lavalier, and not one of you had the decency to tell me." "Jim, keep your voice down," one of his so-called friends hissed, looking around nervously. "You don't need to broadcast this to the whole club. We're all friends. Yours and Linda's. For her, this is the chance of a lifetime. It's just one night." Jim's voice rose with defiance. "I'll make sure to mention this to my lawyer when I file for divorce on Monday. And I'll be sure to tell my children why their father no longer lives with them." "Jim, please, you're not serious, are you?" Dee interjected, desperate. "She loves you. It's just for one night. Please, let her have this, and she'll come back to you." Jim turned to face the group, his fury unyielding. "From now on, whenever any of you visit her, and see our 2 children. Remember this. You had a hand in destroying their family." At that moment, the 2 men who had been sitting with Lavalier stood up and began walking toward Jim. "Ah, look at this," Jim said loudly, mocking them. "Here come Lavalier's 2 thugs. What's the plan? Are you going to take me out to the parking lot and work me over? Your boss stole my wife, destroyed my family, and now you're going to beat me up, right?" He paused, then added sarcastically, "No, wait, I have an idea. Dave, Paul, why don't you send your wife home with one of these guys? They're both professional football players. Sure, they're not Mark Lavalier, but they're on the same team. Then we can all be happy that our wives spent the night with a celebrity. Later, we can all sit around and wonder how we'll ever measure up to a professional athlete when making love to our wives. We'll be left questioning if we're still satisfying them, or if they're thinking about someone else." Both of Lavalier's friends stopped in their tracks. One of the men pulled out his phone and hit the speed dial. "Are you calling Mark?" the other man asked. "Hell yes," the first man replied, his tone sharp. "I'm telling him to bring her back. Look around. Everyone's recording this." His companion glanced around the room. "Damn it, Kevin, a lot of these phones are pointed at us." "Shit," Kevin cursed, turning off his phone. "What's the matter?" the other man asked. Before Kevin could answer, a woman sitting at another table, accompanied by her husband, called out to Jim. He recognized her as the woman Lavalier had danced with earlier in front of Linda. "That jerk tried the same thing with me a while ago," she said. "I told him to go to hell." Jim nodded. "Your husband is a lucky man," he said bitterly. "Obviously a much better judge of character than I am," she retorted. Jim chuckled darkly and turned back to address the stunned group of former friends. "When you see Linda, be sure to tell her this. She gave up her marriage for one night with that idiot, and she wasn't even his first choice." Jim knew that this would be the last time he would speak to anyone at the table, so he made sure they understood exactly how he felt. "I thought you were my friends. Clearly, I was just as wrong about you as I was about my wife." He stared them down, his voice cold and menacing. "The next time any of you men see me, you better start looking for a way out. I won't come looking for you, but if we ever end up in the same room, I will beat the crap out of you. And as for you women," he continued, his tone icier still, "I don't believe in violence against women, but if you ever try to talk to me again, I'll get loud and vulgar and make sure everyone knows you pimped my wife out to this vile piece of crap." He turned his gaze to Dee. "And for you, Dee, I might just make an exception to my rule about women." Panicking, Dee fumbled with her phone, desperately trying to call Linda, but it went straight to voicemail. Around this time, the club manager approached Jim, his expression apologetic but firm. "Sir, I have to ask you to leave. If you refuse, I'll call the police." Jim looked at him coolly. "Oh, don't worry. I'm leaving." Before leaving, Jim turned to the receptionist. "But I have one more question," he said coldly. "Did you know about this? Has Lavalier done this before?" Another woman here mentioned he tried the same thing with her. "I bet my wife isn't the first." He glanced around at the other tables, his voice rising. "Is this place a hunting ground for cheating wives and celebrity predators? Take this as a warning, gentlemen. Bring your wife here, and you might as well leave without her, just like I'm doing tonight." He paused, eyes sweeping over the crowd. "Lavalier doesn't care about destroying your family, just like he didn't care about destroying mine." Jim turned away and made his way to the cloakroom, handing his ticket to the embarrassed attendant before leaving the club. He half expected Lavalier's 2 friends to follow him, but they didn't. As he walked toward the hotel, his mind churned with angry thoughts. What the hell was she thinking? He wondered. We talked about loyalty. In fact, the entire group I just left was talking about how important loyalty is. Everyone agreed it couldn't be compromised. By the time he reached the hotel lobby, his anger had only intensified. He walked up to the front desk, his voice sharp. "I'll be leaving in a few minutes. Have my bill ready." The receptionist, taken aback, asked cautiously, "Sir, is there a problem?" "The room is reserved for the whole night." "Yes, there's a problem," Jim snapped. "I can't believe a hotel with a reputation like yours would support this den of infidelity. Do you know that the dance club you're affiliated with caters to professional athletes who seduce other people's wives? I booked a room to spend a romantic night with my wife. And now, thanks to you and your clientele, I'm going to be divorcing her and breaking apart a family with 2 innocent children." His voice grew even colder as he spoke. I'll go upstairs to pack my things. Have my bill ready when I come back. Carl Mason, the hotel's night manager, overheard the heated exchange as he returned to his office. Concerned, he picked up the phone immediately. Bob, what the hell happened tonight? I've got a client down here who's ready to kill someone. He's claiming Lavalier seduced his wife. Yeah, it was that idiot Mark Lavalier, Bob replied from the other end. I knew something like this would happen sooner or later. Carl muttered in disbelief. This isn't the first time, is it? No, Bob admitted, it's not. Lavalier's pulled this crap before. Sneaking out with someone's wife. Are you kidding me? Why didn't you ban him from the club? Because he brings in customers, Bob answered, his tone defensive. A lot of people come here just because they know Lavalier hangs out here. It's good for business. Carl wasn't convinced. Well, you're right about one thing. Tonight is the last time this happens. From now on, he's banned. I just hope it's not too late, Carl muttered, concern creeping into his voice. I think tonight's incident might hurt business. Well, I'll tell you what, Bob replied. First thing tomorrow morning, I'll talk to the board and recommend we sever all ties with Downbeat. Carl, frustrated, cut him off. Wait, Bob. Let's not wait for anything. You should have stopped this a long time ago. Good luck. He slammed the phone down, his patience worn thin. Carl then walked up to the front desk and spoke to the clerk. Terry, let me know when you see that guy come out of the elevator. It will be done, Mr. Mason, the clerk replied. Meanwhile, Jim returned to his room, emotionally and physically drained. When he opened the door, the sight of the large double bed almost beckoned him. But he didn't want to fall asleep, even to escape the stress. Not yet. He flopped onto the bed, one leg thrown up while the other remained on the floor, his thoughts still racing. He was still too angry to rest, so he sat up, forcing himself to suppress the grief creeping in. Not yet, he thought. I'm not done with the rage. Not by a long shot. Jim grabbed his suitcase, threw it onto the bed, and opened it. From it, he pulled out the $300 Victoria's Secret lingerie he had bought as a surprise for Linda, laying it out carefully. He then found a piece of hotel stationery and a pen from the corner desk and began to write. Happy belated Valentine's Day. It's all yours. After snapping a photo of the lingerie with a note in the foreground, Jim sent it to Linda with a brief but biting message. Never in his life had anyone hurt him as deeply as she had, and now he was determined to repay her in kind. Once the message was sent, he closed his suitcase, grabbed his things, and made his way downstairs to settle the bill. As Jim stepped off the elevator, the clerk immediately called the manager. Sir, my name is Carl Mason, the night manager here, Carl said as he approached Jim. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation earlier. I called the dance club and confirmed what happened. I want to offer you my most sincere apologies and let you know that I'll be recommending to our board that we sever all ties with Downbeat. Furthermore, there will be no charge for your room, and once again, I am deeply sorry this happened. Jim didn't respond, but the hotel manager's words barely registered. He was done. Carl's apology momentarily dulled Jim's anger, but it did little to quell the storm still raging inside him. The manager's promise to sever ties with the club provided a small, bitter sense of satisfaction, but it wasn't enough to soothe the deeper, more profound pain Jim felt. As much as Jim wanted to drive away and escape everything, disappear to the ends of the earth, he knew he couldn't. His children's faces kept pushing through the haze of his fury. His sense of responsibility, that nagging voice telling him he had to be there for them, kept him tethered to reality. On the drive home, Jim's mind fixated on the people in the club who had recorded the scene. A tiny victory, he thought bitterly. He hoped that by morning, the video would be all over the internet. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, every platform imaginable. Let the world see what Mark Lavalier really was. When Jim finally arrived home, his suitcase dropped onto the floor, and without a second thought, he went straight to his home office. He opened his laptop and began searching for what he needed. It took 3 tries, but he eventually found the contact details of several tabloids: National Enquirer, Globe, Confidential, and a few others. Their websites listed 24-hour hotlines, and Jim, with cold determination, jotted down a script for his calls. Dialing the first number, he waited for the operator to answer. National Enquirer Hotline. How can I help you? May I have your name, please? The operator asked. My name is Jim, he replied, his voice flat. But before we continue, I was wondering if you'd be interested in a story about how Mark Lavalier stole a man's wife and destroyed his 10-year marriage. They have 2 children who, thanks to him, will now grow up in a single-parent home. The operator hesitated. Can you confirm this? I can, Jim said, his voice steady. He stole my wife. Right now, while we're talking, she's with him. There was a long pause on the line before the operator spoke again. Jim, can you hold for a couple of minutes? Please don't hang up. I'll be here, Jim replied. A few moments later, the operator returned. Okay, Jim, we're interested. We'll pay $2,000 for the exclusive. May I have your full name? My name is Jim, he said flatly, but I'm not interested in the money. You're my first call, but I'll also be reaching out to the Globe, Confidential, Tatler, and a few others. Jim's voice was cold and determined. I'm betting you have ways of locating celebrities and photographers ready to go at a moment's notice. Whoever gets me the best photos of Lavalier and my wife together gets the exclusive, provided the photos are used with the story. The operator hesitated, then sighed. It's not always easy to get photographs. Some of these guys live in gated communities with security, like Fort Knox. Not my problem, Jim shot back. Between you and your competitors, I'm sure someone can manage. This idiot has fooled everyone with his squeaky clean image. It's time the world saw him for who he really is. The operator paused before responding. Fine, I'll see what we can do. Where should we send the photos if we get them? Jim provided his email address and moved on to make the next set of calls. For more tabloids expressed interest and accepted his challenge for the photographs. Once he finished, Jim packed the bare essentials, clothes, shaving supplies, a few personal items, and began to prepare to leave. As he looked around the house, he muttered to himself. She could have at least taken the damn TV for the kids' sake, but the record player and all the albums were gone. He glanced at his favorite chair. I can't fit it in the car, he thought reluctantly, leaving it behind. He moved through the house, taking photographs of the children's rooms, leaving everything else undisturbed. From the shelf, he grabbed the family album, carefully removing the photos of the children from their protective covers. After taking one last look around, making sure he had everything he wanted, Jim removed his wedding ring and placed it on the table. Beside it, he left a note that read, I hope it was worth it. P.S. I called your parents and asked them to pick up the children. Meanwhile, on Saturday morning, Linda woke up still wrapped in the euphoria of the night before. The previous evening had been everything she had dreamed of, and more. She smiled to herself, curling into her lover's strong embrace. Through the skylight above the bed, she noticed for the first time in weeks that the sun was shining outside. A bird soared in circles above the glass. This must be an omen, she thought, basking in the afterglow of her secret triumph. Her mind drifted back to the moonlit moments of the night before, those brief, stolen hours she would remember forever. It was only after this private reflection that her thoughts began to turn to her husband. What kind of reception will I get when I return? How successful was Dee in smoothing things over? A sudden pang of guilt made its way into her chest, quickly followed by a creeping sense of fear. She turned to look at the rugged, handsome face of her lover, noticing that his eyes were open. Well, she said with a smile, you promised me the night of my life, and you weren't kidding. Thank you. He smiled back, but remained silent, his gaze still intense. I don't have anything planned for today, he said, his voice calm. Stay a while, she urged, her voice soft but insistent. I'd like to, he replied, though his tone carried a touch of reluctance. But I need to get back to the hotel. It's still early, and I hope I can sneak back into the room before Jim wakes up. Linda, however, was quick to distract him. We haven't swum yet, he reminded her, his smile widening. I don't do anything before swimming, he added with a grin. Do you have an indoor pool? She asked, recalling the house tour from the previous night. Almost, he replied, shrugging slightly. It's an outdoor pool, but I close it and heat it in the winter. Linda hesitated for a moment, but quickly dismissed any thoughts of Jim. I didn't bring a swimsuit, she said with a mischievous smile. We have more than a hectare of property around us, he answered confidently. My closest neighbor is 4 miles away. No swimsuit required, my dear. Linda sat up, glancing toward the window. It's so far from home, Mark. I hope you don't expect me to run out there in the cold. I have a warm terry robe and slippers you can wear, he reassured her, his tone light. Minutes later, Linda found herself walking hand in hand with Lavalier toward his outdoor pool. She wore nothing but a robe and slippers, while he was completely naked. The air was cold, and she shivered slightly, though the feeling was quickly overshadowed by the strange sense of adventure that washed over her. If Dee could see me now, she muttered under her breath. What bird? Mark asked, distracted by the vast sky above. Outside, Linda replied, nodding toward the roof. It keeps circling the house. I saw it through the window. We have plenty of those around here, Lavalier said dismissively, leading her into the pool enclosure. Once inside, he helped her remove her robe, placing it neatly on a chair before both of them dove into the warm water. Mark immediately began swimming laps in smooth, powerful strokes. Linda, unable to keep up, swam to the side, watching him glide effortlessly back and forth. She lost count after 25 or 30 laps before Mark disappeared under the water and resurfaced beside her, his breath steady. See, he said, his chest heaving slightly from exertion. There's nothing like a good swim to start the day. Linda nodded, but felt the excitement of the moment drain away. It truly was an experience I'll remember for the rest of my life, she replied. But it's really time for me to go back. Mark's face twisted into a smirk. Yeah, we don't want that weakling to get angry, do we? Linda snapped, her voice sharp. Hey, Jim may not be a football superstar, but he's no pushover. Mark's eyes narrowed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Do you think he'll want to fight me for his wife's honor? Linda froze, her anger momentarily replaced by a deep sense of unease. Mark's sudden cruelty was jarring, and she struggled to process his words. Take me back, she said firmly, her voice now edged with discomfort. Mark chuckled darkly. Sure. They both climbed out of the pool, and Mark grabbed a towel, while Linda reached for her robe. But then, unexpectedly, a loud crack echoed, followed by a sharp pain shooting through her right buttock. She screamed, turning to see Mark twirling the towel in his hands. Did I tell you I'm the champion towel snapper in the locker room? He said, a smug grin spreading across his face. It hurts, Linda yelled, rubbing the sore spot. She reached for her robe again, but before she could pull it on, another snap stung her left side. Mark, stop it. It hurts, she shouted indignantly, fury flashing in her eyes. But the more she tried to protest, the more it seemed to amuse him. He flicked the towel again, this time grazing her thigh. If I were you, I'd run home, he teased, his laughter echoing in the cold air. I'm still wet. I'll get pneumonia if I go out there like this. Linda cried, feeling the sting of the wet towel snap against her skin. Without warning, Lavalier snapped the towel again, narrowly missing her left breast. Linda shrieked in shock and bolted for the door, her heart racing as he chased her, laughing maniacally. Grabbing a towel, Mark yelled at Linda all the way back into the house. She tried to slam the bedroom door behind her, but he was already there, pushing it open effortlessly. It was clear that his demeanor had completely shifted. Now that he'd gotten what he wanted, the charming facade he had put on was gone. The real Mark was revealed, a selfish, childish bully. Get dressed, he ordered sharply. I'll drop you off at the hotel. Linda sat on the edge of the bed, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her panties. The realization hit her hard. Everything she had thought was so special about the night before was nothing but an illusion. The poise, the sophistication, the image of the good guy, it had all been an act. Now, as she dressed, Linda noticed the red welts on her thigh where he had snapped her with the towel. She turned slightly and saw another welt on the back of her leg. Just great, she thought bitterly, exactly what I needed, marks on my body to remind Jim of what I've done. What had once felt like an unforgettable experience now seemed completely shattered. All she wanted was to forget the entire night and leave. The two of them dressed in silence, the air thick with tension, and walked toward the front door. The previous night, Lavalier hadn't even bothered to park in the garage. leaving his SUV in the driveway. They hadn't made it to the end of the porch when he suddenly stopped. Linda froze, her stomach lurching as she looked up, fear creeping over her. Half a dozen photographers stood outside, their telephoto lenses fixed on the couple. Lavalier immediately grabbed Linda's hand, trying to pull her back into the house. "Hey, what are you doing?" she shouted, struggling against his grip. "Let me go," he growled. "Get back inside, they're taking pictures of us." Linda's eyes widened as she finally noticed the cameras. "Oh my God!" Following his lead, she reluctantly retreated back inside. "What the hell is going on?" she demanded, her voice filled with confusion and growing panic. "Why are they taking pictures of us?" Lavalier muttered, pulling his phone from his pocket. Realizing it was still off, he impatiently pressed the power button. Linda did the same with hers. Once Lavalier's phone had powered up, he quickly dialed one of his friends from the dance club. "Kevin, what the hell is going on?" Lavalier snapped into the phone. "There are a ton of paparazzi outside my door." Kevin's cynical laugh echoed through the receiver. "I told you this cucking nonsense would come back to bite you one day. Dude, that woman's husband went nuts last night. You're an internet sensation. You're all over YouTube, Instagram, and God knows where else. What the hell are you talking about?" Lavalier demanded, irritation clear in his voice. "Yeah, genius," Kevin continued. "Last night, half the club had their phones out, recording the drama. After that guy left, everyone was still staring at us like we were in a zoo. Watch YouTube. See for yourself." "Fine," Lavalier muttered, hanging up. He opened the YouTube app, his fingers trembling with frustration, while Linda, now visibly anxious, asked again, "What happened?" Ignoring her, he clicked on the first video that appeared. It was Jim's furious tirade from the club. Linda's heart sank as she heard her husband's voice booming angrily through Lavalier's phone. "Oh my God," she gasped, the reality of the situation sinking in. "Your husband's an idiot," Lavalier sneered, tossing the phone onto the couch. Linda immediately called Dee, her hand shaking as she held the phone to her ear. "Thank God you called," Dee cried, her voice urgent. "I've been trying to reach you since last night. Are you home?" "No," Linda replied, her voice tight with worry. "I'm still at Mark's house. There are photographers everywhere," Linda added, feeling the panic rise. Dee cut in quickly. "Linda, Jim went crazy last night. I tried to calm him down, tell him you still love him, but he said he's filing for divorce. He might also be planning to move out of the house. You need to go home right now and try to stop him." Her voice dropped, a note of desperation creeping in. "Honey, he's really angry." Linda's voice trembled as she responded, Okay, I'm leaving now." She hung up, feeling a wave of despair wash over her. Turning to Lavalier, she said shakily, "I have to go home immediately." He scoffed, not even looking at her. "I'm not taking you back." "Are you kidding me?" she shouted, her frustration mounting. "Call a taxi or an Uber or something." Tears welled in Linda's eyes as she pleaded with him. But Lavalier turned his back on her, consumed by his own emotions. She quickly pulled up the Uber app and arranged for a ride. Sliding down the wall of the foyer, Linda sobbed quietly, her body shaking with each breath. It wasn't long before the buzzer rang, signaling the arrival of the car. She threw her coat over her head, trying to shield her face from the photographer's prying cameras as she hurried toward the car. The Uber driver glanced at her repeatedly through the rearview mirror, trying to place her face. "Are you a celebrity or something?" he asked, his voice tentative. "No," Linda replied softly, her voice cracking. "I'm not famous. I'm just stupid." She wiped her eyes, her heart breaking all over again. "Please, just get me home as fast as you can." On the drive, she checked her phone, hoping for some sort of message from Jim. When she opened the text he had sent, her heart shattered. The image of the neatly laid out lingerie, paired with his scathing note, sent a wave of guilt crashing over her. She let out a mournful sob, and the driver glanced at her once again through the mirror, but said nothing. He didn't know what she had done, but he couldn't help but feel sorry for her. After paying the driver, Linda rushed into the house, her emotions spiraling out of control. "Jim," she called out, her voice shaking. But the house was eerily silent. She stood there for a moment, wondering if he might still be at the hotel, But that hope quickly evaporated as she checked the closet. It was empty. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. The weight of everything she had done, everything that had unraveled, crashed down on her. Almost an hour passed before her tears slowed enough for her to stop crying. Wiping her swollen eyes, she decided to go downstairs to make coffee, hoping the mundane task would clear her mind and help her think. That's when she saw it, the wedding ring and the note he had left on the table. In an instant, it hit her. Her marriage was over. She dropped into a chair, staring at the ring, and let her mind replay the events of the night before. How deeply must I have hurt him? She thought, her chest tightening with remorse. Why couldn't I see it at the time? It was a question she would ask herself for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, Jim struggled to fall asleep, his mind racing, but exhaustion finally overtook him. He slept for 9 hours, not waking until 10:30 on Saturday morning. His head was foggy, and it wasn't until he stepped into the shower that the haze began to lift. As he dressed, he considered turning on his phone, but decided he wasn't ready to face the aftermath of last night. He needed a good breakfast, coffee, and time to gather his thoughts. At the front desk, the receptionist recommended 3 nearby restaurants, and Jim decided to try Denny's, a block away. It was well past noon by the time he returned to his motel room. Taking a deep breath, Jim finally turned on his phone, bracing himself for whatever awaited him. Notifications flooded Jim's phone, with over a dozen missed calls from his so-called friends, which he chose to ignore. But then he saw Linda's reply to his text message and hesitated before opening it. "My dear husband, I cannot even imagine how much pain I caused you last evening. Saying I'm sorry doesn't come close to expressing the shame and regret I feel. All I can do is ask for your forgiveness and beg you. If there is even a drop of love left in your heart for me, please give me a chance to somehow make amends." Jim sat down at the small desk in his motel room, his fingers hovering over the keys for a long moment. Finally, he typed his reply. "You're right about the pain. Never in my life has someone who professed to love me so openly thrust a dagger into my heart and twisted it for greater persuasion. I'm sure my anger will eventually fade, and I'll realize I still love you. But if we stayed together, I'd always be on edge, waiting for the next time something like this happened. I can't live like that, Linda. I'll meet with a lawyer as soon as possible to file for divorce. In the meantime, let's make this as fair as we can for the sake of the children. I'd like to come over tomorrow so we can hopefully sit down together and calmly explain everything to them. Afterward, I plan to spend the rest of the day with them. Let me know if you have any issues with this." After hitting send, Jim turned to his laptop. Among the emails in his inbox were responses from the 4 tabloids that had accepted his challenge. The first 2 were unsurprising. They contained photographs of Lavalier and Linda standing apart in front of his house, both wearing coats. Although the images captured them together, they didn't explicitly reveal what had transpired. Jim had expected this, but secretly hoped for something more incriminating, like an arm around her shoulders. Then he opened the email for the National Enquirer. "What the heck?" he muttered under his breath as he clicked through the photos. The first few images were astonishing. There was Lavalier and Linda in bed together, seemingly taken by a hidden ceiling camera. His stomach churned as he continued scrolling. The next series showed them walking outside toward what looked like a Quonset-style military hut. Linda was in a white robe, and Lavalier was almost completely naked. Jim should have stopped there, but he didn't. The final set of photos was the hardest to bear. Linda was running ahead of Lavalier, laughing like a carefree teenager, while he playfully snapped a towel at her. The joy on her face, the uninhibited fun they were having, it hit him like a ton of bricks. For the first time, Jim cried. The tears came hot and fast, overwhelming him. He had never felt anything so excruciating as the death of his marriage. It took him a moment to pull himself together. He washed his face, brewed coffee using the motel's machine, and sat down to think. By 2 o'clock, he felt ready to take action again. Jim looked up the contact information for the National Enquirer and asked to speak with Darl, the reporter he had previously worked with. "Darl isn't here," the operator explained. "He only works part-time, usually late at night. May I connect you with another reporter?" "That's fine," Jim replied. A different voice came on the line. "Sir, may I call you Jim?" "Yes, that's fine," Jim said, trying to steady his voice. Are you ready to share your story now? The reporter asked, clearly eager. No, I'm just calling to let you know that your team won the challenge. The photos you captured outshone all the others by a mile, Jim said, his tone flat. Do you have hidden cameras or something? The reporter chuckled. Not quite, Jim replied, his interest piqued. I happen to live in the same city as your secret weapon. Secret weapon? Jim asked, his curiosity growing. Yeah, the reporter admitted. We can't disclose his name, but he's the best paparazzo in the business. Not only is he a damn good photographer, but he's also an electronics genius. Last year, he bought a drone with the best zoom and resolution on the market, then modified it. He added some kind of muffler to make it nearly silent. Normally, drones are pretty noisy, but his can fly just 3 meters away without being noticed. You won't hear a thing. Jim was intrigued. And how does that tie into the photos of Linda and Lavalier? The reporter continued. He equipped the camera with a polarizing filter. It reduces glare from the sun, kind of like a pair of Polaroid sunglasses. He can park the drone outside someone's window and adjust the filter with his phone, so there's no reflection on the glass. Everything's crystal clear. Jim's stomach turned as he listened. That's how he got those photos of your wife and Lavalier in bed together. As soon as he got the call last night, he found the address and went there to scout the situation. It was still dark when he sent the drone up, and he discovered a sunroof. He thought he was above Lavalier's bed, but it wasn't until the sun came up that he could see inside. The reporter went on, he also has extra long telephoto lenses for his regular camera. He found a place in the back where he could perch in case they try to sneak out that way, though he didn't expect them to undress like that. There's an indoor pool at Lavalier's place, and apparently they went skinny dipping together. Jim recoiled, the words cutting him like knives. He could hardly process what he was hearing. Anyway, the reporter continued, as soon as the sun rose, he got the shot from above through the skylight. That's how he captured those images. Jim felt sick. He didn't need to hear more. The photographer stayed back when another man had positioned himself in front, but he couldn't believe his luck when he saw Lavalier and Linda come out and head toward the pool. Along with the pictures Jim had already seen, the photographer had managed to capture more using the drone, but those taken from ground level were far superior. Jim and Paul spent the next 2 hours talking on the phone, as Jim recounted his side of the story in detail and answered the endless stream of questions. By the time they finished, he was emotionally drained. After hanging up, Jim found himself questioning whether it was all worth it. Would this exposure really hurt Lavalier's career? Probably not. People like him always seem to get away with everything, Jim thought bitterly. It was then that he remembered the many people at the club who had their phones out, capturing the events of the night. He couldn't help but wonder if any of it had ended up on the internet. He sent an email to the other tabloids, informing them that they had lost the challenge, then opened YouTube and typed Lavalier into the search bar. His breath caught in his throat as the entire first page of search results was filled with videos of him. Jim clicked on the first video and watched a replay of his public humiliation. His eyes misted over as he read through the comments that followed. There were more than 300 of them, most of which were harsh critiques of Lavalier and, to some extent, Linda. A couple of comments were aimed at him, calling him weak, but the majority were critical of Lavalier's actions. Jim found himself growing more and more inspired by what he read. He began to think that maybe he didn't even need the tabloid story after all. His thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of his phone. It was a text message from his former friend Dave. Jim had no intention of opening it, but curiosity got the better of him. He clicked on the message. Jim, I just got off the phone with Linda. She says you've gone crazy. Please don't do this. It was just one night. You shouldn't leave a 10-year marriage over this. Please reconsider. Jim read the message, his frustration boiling over. He typed a quick reply. Last night I told you don't call, don't write, don't contact me in any way. None of you warned me when you knew what Linda was going to do. Not even you, my so-called buddy. If I could have gotten to her before she left, I most likely could have stopped her and maybe saved my marriage. Of course, we'll never know now, will we? Don't contact me again. I will never receive calls or texts from you, Dave, or anyone else who sat at that table last night. To me, you can all go to hell. With a final press of the send button, another wave of sadness washed over him. His heart ached as he thought about the loss of Linda, their marriage, and, to some extent, the children. He briefly considered staying married for their sake, but quickly dismissed the idea. It would do no good for the children to grow up in a home devoid of love. And he knew he could never show Linda the affection he once had. The love had faded, and it was a decision he could no longer avoid. Linda was ready to meet him on Sunday morning. When Jim arrived at her door, she had already showered, dressed beautifully, and applied makeup. She greeted him warmly, inviting him inside for coffee, and he followed her into the kitchen. "Where are the children?" Jim asked, his voice tight. "Outside, playing in the backyard," Linda replied. Jim nodded and sat down at the table. He knew she was eager to talk, and despite his resolve, part of him hoped she would somehow find a way to make him stay. He knew, however, that it was unlikely to happen. "Jim, I'm so sorry for what I did," Linda began, her voice filled with remorse. "I can't even imagine how you felt when you found out I had left. Honestly, I don't know what I was thinking." Jim's face remained impassive as he replied, "I agree. No one could possibly understand how I felt." His voice softened slightly, though the hurt still lingered. "If this hadn't happened, I still don't know what came over me. I've never been with anyone this famous before," Linda continued, tears welling in her eyes. "It made me feel so special. And then, when he asked me to go home with him, I don't know. I was just so amazed. I didn't think about anything. I didn't even think about what it would do to you." She began crying, clearly struggling to express herself. "I'm so sorry, Jim," she whispered, wiping her tears. "I kept telling myself it would only be one night. Just one night that would never happen again. I told myself it was just one night." Jim sat quietly, his emotions a mix of anger and sadness. "Let me tell you how I feel," he said, his voice steady. She nodded, though her face showed her inner turmoil. "When I found out you left last night," he began slowly, "everyone at the table said, 'It's just one night. Give her this one night. You can't divorce her over just one night.' Your Annie said the same thing. But here's the thing. I understand that it was just one night, but it's not that simple." He paused, looking Linda directly in the eyes. "If you came to me and told me that you fell in love with another man, and that you were leaving me to spend your life with him, I would understand. I wouldn't like it, but I would understand. I've seen it happen. Two people get too close at work and fall in love. It happens." Linda looked at him, confused. He continued, "If you had told me you went out with the girls, got drunk, and ended up in bed with some womanizer, I would understand that too. Again, I wouldn't like it, but it happens. No one is perfect." He took a deep breath before adding, "But that's not what happened here. This isn't just one mistake, Linda. This is something entirely different, and it's something I can't get past." Jim's voice trembled with raw emotion as he continued. "You barely knew him, so I know you weren't in love. You had only a few drinks, so you weren't drunk. And I was right there, so you certainly weren't lonely. Damn, we had a wonderful romantic evening planned, and you threw it all away for one night," he said, his words punctuating the last two words, stretching them out as if to underscore the depth of his betrayal. "You can't imagine how worthless I felt, knowing that my wife cared so little about me that she deliberately drove a stake through my heart for one night with another man." The hurt in Jim's voice deepened as he went on. "I didn't care who he was. Do you understand what I'm saying? The fact that it was just one night doesn't make it better. It makes it 1,000 times worse. You threw it all away. Our marriage, our family life, our future, and our children's future. All for one night." Jim's tone hardened as he continued, though a slight tremor betrayed his emotions. "You knew how I would feel. You knew how devastated I would be. And yet, you ignored my feelings for one night with him." The pain in his voice was palpable as he spoke, but he didn't want the children to witness his breakdown. He took a moment to calm himself and lower his voice, not wanting them to see him so vulnerable. "Do you see what you've done? Understand?" he asked, his voice quiet but intense. "You didn't leave me for a lifetime of happiness with someone else. You left me for one night with another man." Linda, who had been listening silently, wiped the fresh tears from her face. She finally understood, truly understood, what Jim had been trying to tell her. Until now, she had convinced herself that it was just one mistake, one fleeting lapse in judgment that would never happen again. She had thought that Jim would forgive her and that they could move on. But as Jim laid it all bare, she realized how wrong she had been. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice. And that choice had shattered everything. Linda sat in stunned silence, unable to offer any defense. Jim was right, and she knew it. The marriage, once filled with trust, had crumbled, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. There was no argument, no excuse that could save them now. Their marriage was over. After a long, heavy pause, Linda asked for a few minutes to compose herself before speaking to the children. Jim agreed, giving her the space she needed. When she was ready, they called the children, who immediately bombarded Jim with questions about where he had been. Linda carefully explained that Dad was looking for a second home, trying to keep things as normal as possible for the children. They clung to the promise of spending the day with their father. But when he dropped them off later that evening, they made up for their earlier restraint by crying in their beds. Linda, hearing the sobs of her children, felt a wave of guilt unlike any she had ever known. She knew that she was the cause of their pain, and it was a weight she couldn't escape. The following week, Jim filed for divorce, just as he had said he would. Linda, accepting the fairness of the situation, hired the same lawyer to represent her. It was agreed that she would stay in the family home for the sake of the children, while Jim rented a 3-bedroom apartment just 4 miles away. The children would now split their time between both homes. Though Jim had braced himself for the emotional fallout, the consequences turned out to be far better than he had anticipated. In an attempt to salvage the reputation of his establishment and prevent a loss of business due to the YouTube videos, the owner of Downbeat posted a video of his own. In it, he stated that the club was now under new management and, without mentioning names, alluded to a new policy regarding some former clients. Jim understood this to mean that Lavalier was no longer welcome at the club, and the fallout continued from there. The real storm hit when the latest edition of the National Enquirer hit the shelves. Though Linda's face had been obscured in the photos, the one of her and Lavalier in bed together, his arm around her, made the front page, accompanied by several other images. The article was a bombshell, but Linda was grateful that the children were too young to fully understand the implications of the scandal. A month after the story had made its rounds in grocery store checkout lines, the National Enquirer offered Linda $5,000 for her side of the story. While she felt she didn't deserve to be compensated for her mistakes, she accepted the money, choosing to put it into a college fund for Emma and Tommy. In the article, she issued a heartfelt apology to Jim, acknowledging that what she had done was the stupidest mistake of her life. She didn't hold back in describing Lavalier's cruelty toward her, revealing that he had hit her with a towel hard enough to leave welts on her skin. When Jim read her words, he realized how wrong he had been to assume she had been enjoying herself that night. For the first time since the nightmare began, Jim felt a twinge of sympathy for his soon-to-be ex-wife. Lavalier's reputation, meanwhile, had taken a serious blow. No longer was he the golden boy of Chicago. Instead, he was widely despised. When the new football season rolled around, Lavalier found himself avoided by teammates, and for the first time in his career, he was booed by fans when he took the field. Just 2 years after that night at Downbeat, Lavalier was traded to a much smaller team, his career in tatters. As for Linda, she waited a full year before even considering dating again, but she found herself feeling disillusioned by the idea. Based on her decade-long relationship with Jim, her expectations were simply too high. In time, she gave up the search entirely, choosing instead to focus on raising her 2 wonderful children. Jim, on the other hand, fared a little better. After 2 failed short-term relationships, he met a woman who showed some promise. But Jim wasn't rushing into anything. He had learned from his past, and for now, he was content to take things slow. As Jim reflected on his life, he thought, let it happen if it happens. In the meantime, he and Linda had found a way to coexist peacefully. The children were adjusting well to their new living arrangements, and they still managed to spend time together as a family on occasion. Life, in its own way, continued on. As for your opinion of the story, you seem to have found it both exciting and engaging, particularly with its intriguing plot twists. It's understandable that based on the emotional depth and complexity of Jim's character, you feel aligned with his perspective. Jim's actions, while initially driven by deep pain and a sense of betrayal, ultimately seem justified as he seeks to rebuild his life, putting his children's well-being at the forefront of his decisions. His journey of loss, realization, and eventual self-recovery is compelling. And from your standpoint, his decisions feel natural and appropriate in light of the circumstances. My own take on the story acknowledges the emotional stakes involved. While Jim's reaction is understandable, his path toward closure and healing, though painful, also highlights an important facet of human relationships: the need for respect, trust, and loyalty. Linda's actions, while regrettable, reflect a complex web of emotional impulses that ultimately led her to a significant personal reckoning. The story suggests that while betrayals and mistakes can shatter lives, they also open doors to new understandings and self-growth, even if those doors are hard to see at first. In short, it's a narrative about both personal loss and eventual healing, with no easy answers, but a journey that feels, in many ways, inevitable. Until new videos, indeed.